Okay, well, hello everybody, and thanks for being here today. So if you just heard, I'm Cynthia Petrie, a VP External at BCIT, and I'm not an automotive expert. However, I do represent Western Canada's largest trades trainer Western Canada's largest trades training provider. And BCIT delivers hands-on training. We're industry focused, and we provide training to over 44,000 students each year. We've got 5 campuses across the Lower Mainland, and we consider ourselves the industry partner for education. We have a provincial mandate to support strategic workforce development, and by doing that, we connect industry, government, and education to build the graduates that the province and Canada needs. A good example of our partnerships with industry, BCIT has a partnership with Tesla Start, and that's a first-of-its-kind program in Canada that provides students with specialized training to become Red Seal certified automotive service technicians. We also offer employment with Tesla service centers throughout Canada, so great opportunity there. The auto industry is navigating 2 big shifts at once, a trade shock and a technology shift. Canada is still dealing with 25% counter tariffs on certain U.S. vehicle imports and is consulting on changes to the automotive emission framework. Ottawa announced in February that it will repeal the electric vehicle availability standard and replace it with an emissions-based path, while also launching a new auto strategy, charging investments, and reskilling support. So we know households across BC are facing serious affordability pressures, while the automotive sector is undergoing a once-in-a-generation transition. We're seeing electrification targets, shifting incentives, rising fuel prices, labor shortages, and global supply chain pressures. Consumers are already responding, and in BC last year, hybrids accounted for 20.9% of new vehicle sales, while EVs represented 18.3%, down from 22.8% the year before, suggesting many buyers are looking for technologies that balance fuel savings, affordability, and range certainty. I hear range anxiety a lot from people who have EVs. At the same time, BC has removed EV incentives while maintaining one of the most aggressive zero-emission vehicle mandates in North America, effectively turning the province into a real-world test of how policy, affordability, and consumer demand align. So, we've assembled a great panel here to help us make sense of the changing landscape. Can we align consumer affordability, government policy, workforce capacity, and global competitiveness? We'll find out with this panel. Off we go. So if we could start by maybe down the line, Blair, with you, and just state your name, your title, and in one sentence, what is the single biggest force reshaping Canada's auto sector this year?
Well, thanks very much for being here and moderating, and my co-panelists. It's great to have you here. And Bridget, Board of Trade, thank you very much for helping us kick off Auto Show Week in Vancouver. I think I'm going to cheat and say 2 things, I think, in answer to your question. One is affordability is such an ever-present issue, not just in our sector, but in every sector. And the other is technology. Technology is revolutionizing this industry. Every minute of the day, there's something new, whether it's safety systems, drivetrains, all of those things. So I think those are the 2 particular areas that are really a big evolutionary time in our sector.
Thanks.
So I'm McDaniel. I'm the President and CEO of ICBC. You'll know ICBC as a public auto insurer, and as far as insurers go, we're a really big one. We're the 2nd biggest auto insurer in the country, 4th biggest property and casualty insurer in Canada, selling one product in one place. But we're more than that. We license every driver, we register and license every vehicle. We spend about $50 million a year in road safety. So thrilled to be included in this panel because I do see ourselves as playing a critical support role for the industry I steal from Blair. I think technology advancement, if I had to pick one thing, is the thing I think the most about. I see cars transitioning from, cars with computers in them to computers that happen to move around on our roads, and that's a big shift as far as how we handle those things.
Hello everybody, my name is Charles Bernard. Thanks for having me and CDA. So I'm the Chief Economist for the Canadian Automotive Dealers Association, which we represent around 3,400 dealers across the nation. That's 178,000 jobs. It's 31 million repair orders every year. In BC, it's 33,000 jobs. It's more than 450 dealers. So it's a big sector that's at the end of the funnel of the entire industry is going to be represented on this panel. So thanks for having me. I know I look French. I sound French as well. So if you have questions about Quebec, I'll be happy to answer them. And I'll say, because I know what my colleagues on my right are going to say about some of the major changes that have happened and that are kind of putting our industry in a different direction. I think underneath those structural changes that are happening to our integrated market, I think the ability of the retail and the general auto industry ability to adapt is also something that I think will carry us moving forward. As you know, those changes were immense amount of pressure on the entire industry. But if you go and ask a lot of consumers, affordability is still going to be an issue. But compared to what they thought it was going to be before the crisis, and where the adaptation kind of took place, and we saw manufacturers adapt, we saw dealers adapt to at least give a chance to consumers to still be in the market, it's a behavior and ability that I think will transcend the tough times that we're going through. So I'll end with that. David?
Good afternoon, thanks for having me. My name is David Adams. I'm the President and CEO of Global Automakers of Canada. We have 16 member companies from all over the world that represent about 62.5% of the sales in Canada. And our two manufacturing members, Honda and Toyota, represent about 75% of the vehicles that are produced in Canada. I guess one word for me to highlight what's keeping everybody up at night is disruption overall. And in my mind, that includes a whole bunch of things. It includes the technology disruption, includes the trade disruption, it includes the disruptions that we're seeing on a regular basis from south of the border, and the Strait of Hormuz being closed and the price of oil spiking up. Doesn't seem like a day or week goes by without a new disruptive factor impacting our industry.
Good afternoon. I'm Brian Kingston. I'm the president of the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association. We represent Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis here in Canada. I know you've asked for one item that's disrupting the industry and will be a challenge in the future, but I have to give you two. There's an external factor and there's an internal one, and you've captured these in your opening remarks. Externally, right now, the industry is under unprecedented pressure because of U.S. tariffs. This industry is totally integrated with the United States. Of the 1.2 million vehicles that are built in Canada, about 90% go to the United States. So if there's no access to the U.S., there's no Canadian automotive industry. It's that simple. So the next year, in the renewal of our trilateral trade agreement, the CUSMA, as well as efforts by Canada to get rid of the tariffs, is absolutely critical for the future of the sector. And then secondly, internal, this, the Prime Minister loves to say we have to control what we can control. Well, there are a lot of very damaging internal policies that Canada has in place that are putting huge pressure on the automotive industry. The federal EV mandate was one, but it's important to note that we're 6 weeks out from the announcement. The mandate's still in place. It has not been repealed. That is hugely challenging for the industry. And here in BC, of course, we have the most aggressive EV mandate in all of North America, targets that are completely disconnected from reality, and that's going to put massive pressure on the auto industry as well as dealerships. So external tariffs, internal damaging regulations.
Thanks, Brian. Well, you kind of touched on the first question, but we could probably dive into it a little bit more. So touching on the federal government, and they've moved from a sales mandate approach to an emissions outcomes focus. Does this create the flexibility the sector needs, or does it risk slowing investment and consumer momentum? And I'm thinking of you, Brian, and David, and then maybe over to Blair for a probing question after that.
Sure, yeah, I mean, it definitely is the right approach. Emissions regulations have always been favored by the automotive industry because they're technology agnostic. It's not telling manufacturers what share of vehicles they have to sell, what ratio they have to hit. It is telling manufacturers, here's the overarching target of emissions reductions that you must achieve. You find a way to get there. And these regulations have been in place since 2011. In Canada, we've seen increases in efficiency by over 40% in the light-duty vehicle fleet. These regulations work. We don't need, on top of that, these redundant and duplicative ZEP mandates, which then dictate a ratio. So it is the right approach. The only thing I would note is the devil is in the details. You have to make sure that these emissions targets are achievable. If the objective is to get to 90% EV sales in 4 years, well, that's obviously not going to happen because the consumer isn't there. So it's the right approach, but they actually need to design them correctly.
Thanks. David?
I would just pick it off what Brian said. Yeah, it's the right approach, not technology forced to. And I think the devil really is in the details. And I think what we don't want to do is exchange a highly stringent ZEB mandate for a highly stringent, unachievable GHG emissions targets. So I think what's implicit in that process is ensuring that there's a constant review process to making sure that we're tracking where we want to go. And I think fundamentally, all of us up on the stage, we want to reduce emissions, but there are good ways to do that and bad ways to do that. And that's why I think Brian's earlier comments, I think, try to emphasize the fact that the best thing that the province of BC can do and the province of Quebec can do is to stand down their own mandates and focus on a national approach to reduce greenhouse gas emissions across the board.
Blair, question for you. We're kind of, there's a lot been said, but I think you can focus on British Columbia and talking about how EV purchase incentives have been removed. But we continue to, like you say, one of the most aggressive zero-emission mandates in North America. So if consumer demand shifts towards hybrids rather than fully electric vehicles, does that create an operational challenge for dealers trying to meet legislative sales targets?
Well, we have a system in BC now where it's all stick and no carrot, where we have a demand problem, not a supply problem. So we're forcing the industry to react to that structure and do things that are just going to impact affordability for consumers. So as my colleagues have said, we've had incentives both provincially and federally. Both disappeared last year. The federal government's come back this year, February 16th, with a limited program, which is already showing signs of assisting. That's great. But then we're, as Premier Doug Ford from Ontario was saying, we've got these interprovincial trade barriers of various systems sitting around the country. Provincial governments come out and said, look, we want to align with the federal government. So please align with the federal government. We don't need another system here that's bureaucratic and costly and is all stick and no carrot. Consumers need the support now. The industry has spent billions and billions of dollars building these things and doing what governments have asked. Transition to electric vehicles has happened. Now we've got to get the consumers to come along on the ride. And governments, unfortunately, got the cart before the horse, as it were. And now we need to switch that around.
The EV horse.
The EV horse.
Charles, a question for you. If governments could only get one thing right over the next 18 months, what would matter most for the auto ecosystem? Thinking about stable policy, consumer incentives, charging infrastructure, tariff relief, faster permitting.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll give you one maybe more macro and one more granular, if you can say. I think the big one is the one that David and Brian highlighted in terms of we need alignment. First of all, we need to make sure that these new clarity in the industry with the mandates are actually gone, and then we can focus on the emission regulation, but also to not have silos within the country where you have a federal approach, but then provincially you have that you have that supply side tools providing no result, generating more negative effects, and giving no clarity for consumers. So we need to have an approach where our dealers are involved in selling those cars, manufacturers want to sell those cars, but we need to get on the demand side and use that lever more instead of focusing on the supply side lever. The EV mandate federally and provincially is a supply side tool. There's nothing in it for the demand. They need to pivot, like Blair said. And I think the second item is maybe more for the industry as a whole moving forward, maybe long term, but I think the technician shortage is something it's a wall that the industry is facing, and I think if the government provincially, I know it's a lot of work being done, and federally recognize it, dealers are in COVID, for example, were recognized as essential services because of the role they played in fixing, repairing cars, ambulances, fire trucks, and it's a problem that's immense. It's only in Ontario it's 3,000 technicians short, and more than 6,000 in Canada. So that's an issue long, and I know we'll talk about it, but it's an issue that for me in the long run will create massive economic impacts across the industry. And if we're able to sell those cars more efficiently with less trade barriers, it's all good, but we got to be able to fix them at the end of the day, and that's something that I think we should look at a bit more moving forward.
Anybody else like to weigh in on that one?
Maybe I'll just add, I think we're talking about electrification and the ZEV mandates, and that's the future. We all want to go in that direction, but we can only go as fast as the consumer will go, and I think that was the point that Blair was making. And S&P Mobility, they've cited statistics that are saying the natural level of EV penetration in BC is probably going to be 30 to 35% around 2030. Why? Well, because there are a lot of places where people live that MERS, apartments, whatever, condos that don't have access to charging infrastructure. And if you don't have access to charging infrastructure, it's kind of difficult to make that your personal vehicle. And I think the other thing is just the reliability of the charging infrastructure as well. If it's there, it's got to be functional, it's got to operate, and we have to have enough of it. Because the last thing you want is encouraging people to buy an EV only to go on a road trip and find out that what limited infrastructure there is there. Yeah, your charge might take 20 minutes, but there's somebody already plugged in that's going to take 20 minutes. So these are all things that need to be considered as we make that transition.
Yeah, I'd just say I'd like to see governments walk the talk on this whole idea of a Team Canada approach. I mean, the Canadian economy is under great pressure, and we're going to see that pressure from tariffs, protectionism, and other headwinds really start to bite this year. And there's been a lot of talk about, well, how do we work together to support our key industries in the face of this and grow the Canadian economy, yet I haven't seen a lot of that translating into action. And I think EV mandates are a great example of an area where we can improve the economic fortunes of this country, improve the competitiveness of the auto industry. And just to give you an example here of how important this is, of the 12 models that are built in Canada, manufactured in Canada, 10 of them will be illegal for sale in British Columbia in 9 years under the mandate. So, imagine a policy like that. Imagine the Premier of Ontario said in 9 years, we are making it illegal to use BC lumber. We're phasing it out. That is just a phenomenally backwards policy when you're facing so much economic pressure. So it'd be nice to see premiers, provinces get on the same page as the federal government and try and support key industries that really drive the Canadian economy, and Ottawa is obviously one of those.
Any other comments on that one?
The only thing I would add to is anytime you have a difference, you have cost.
Yeah.
And if we're really being cognizant of trying to address the affordability issue that Blair mentioned, then we need to get rid of differences.
Yeah. So we've talked about trade and tariffs a little bit, but maybe I'll bring up Chinese EV, because I know it'll probably come up maybe on Slido, but maybe talking about it a little bit. And how are we feeling about how exposed is Canada's manufacturing base to tariff volatility and global competition with the Chinese EV production capacity expanding rapidly? What does this mean, and what are your thoughts around that? Anyone like to take that? Brian?
Sure, I'm happy to start. So we were very much supportive of the government's stand with respect to China and putting in place the 100% tariff to align with the U.S. But the main reason was for that. We've always aligned our policies with the United States. in the automotive sector. And as we were approaching this review of our CUSMA agreement, it made deep sense to be aligned with the U.S. on how we approach China. So now the government has taken a different approach, and I think that will cause us challenges at the negotiating table, and the government's going to have to navigate that, and there will likely be a price to pay for making that decision. But the other factor is this: auto companies can compete with anybody in the electric vehicle space. North American manufacturers can compete, but it has to be a level playing field. And the Chinese economic model is very clear how they do this, and it's called Made in China 2050 or 2025, at least in 2015. They indicated they're going to be a global player in electrification. So they put about $280 billion US in subsidies into the industry. They've got enough capacity to satisfy their domestic demand for EVs 3 times over, and now they export the additional capacity abroad, and they're typically dumping it into other markets below market value. So we just have to have a level playing field if we're going to compete. And while it's only 49,000 vehicles, that is 1/3 of the EV market in Canada. So I'd like to see the rules be fair and even so that we can compete directly with those manufacturers and not have them have that price advantage.
I think the other 2 factors too are, and why some are saying, well, this is great, because it's sort of predicated on a certain percentage of these vehicles being sold under $35,000. And if you look at the regulations, well, that's not going to happen this year. It's only going to be 10% next year, which amounts to about 5,200 vehicles based on the increase in the quota. So is that really going to drive the rest of the market to say, oh, we better lower our prices too? And the other reality is too is that that's the landed price of the vehicle, and there's probably another 20 or 25% that gets added on top of that. And then plus the fact that if a Chinese company only have, say, 10,000 units of quota, probably not going to sell them at the bargain basement price. You might be able to sell it for $25,000, but what do I know? It strikes me that you're probably going to look at what's available in the marketplace. If the lowest price to be is $39,500, you're probably going to price yours somewhere around $35,000. So is this really going to be the prospect of low-cost EVs entering the Canadian market? Probably not. I think the other reality that Canada still hasn't addressed that the U.S. has, which we need to, is the whole concerns that were raised at the time where the 100% tariff was put in place around cybersecurity and where the information goes that is collected in these vehicles. So those are the factors that we need to consider.
Yes, and on the cybersecurity, little plug for BCIT is we've been doing projects on that, and it's a real thing that maybe a lot of people don't really know about is the information that it's constantly emitting out, and the privacy concerns around that. So yeah, it's something that people don't think about when you're in.
No, I would say related to that as well, there can be an assumption if the car is cheaper, it's cheaper to insure.
Yeah.
But if the parts aren't available and if qualified technicians aren't available, then insurance is going to be tied to what it costs to fix the car. And so it will not necessarily translate to cheaper auto insurance.
Yeah.
And from a dealer perspective, dealers, if Chinese manufacturers are coming, dealers want the opportunity to work with them. They'd like to see them come in and work as part of the franchise dealer network rather than pulling a Tesla or other direct sales model. And anything I've heard from other dealer organizations in some of the other countries where they come in, it's kind of like a tsunami. The federal government needs to really structure the entry of these companies into Canada and to include them in the dealer network that exists already in the country.
Jason, maybe over to you, going back to, these vehicles are now more software driven, they're complex to repair. How do we avoid a future where insurance costs, repair delays, skill shortages become a drag on adoption and affordability? So kind of looking into that more, again, we talked about cybersecurity and data, vulnerability. What does that mean for the consumer and costs?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot to the answer to that question. But if you started, what drives insurance costs? Well, there are about 800 crashes a day in BC. We spend about $15 million a year in claims. And so, for insurance will be cheaper and all look smarter if you stop crashing into each other. But when we can't control that, the other opportunity questions are really, with the product, the processes, and probabilities, I'll say quickly. So in jurisdictions like Ontario, like Alberta, where they have a lawsuit-based model on the injury side, they're seeing rising costs both in injury and in the cost to fix vehicles. And that is really sort of exponentially increasing insurance costs. We have a care-based model here. I know Alberta is moving to one. That really manages that side. So basic rates in BC will be flat for 7 years, and on top of a big, on average, $450 discount when we introduce the model. So that's a big piece of it. Can't have all forces pushing up. Then it's, we have because we're the only insurer in BC, we have an agreement with about almost 1,000 collision repair facilities, so we can do things like, where possible, repair parts instead of replace them. Where possible, use recycled parts. Those things where it's safe to do so, and possible, manages costs. We're also trying to work with the Automotive Retailer Association to really support folks going in the industry. And that's where BCIT has a big role as well. I've had the benefit of seeing some of that. We need people that can fix cars, and we need them in all parts across the province. That's a big opportunity to manage it. And the last way people really manage the cost of insurance, I said probabilities, but it's what's your likelihood of having a crash. You go a lot of years and you don't have a crash, and you do a lot of experience, you pay less. How often you use your vehicle, what you use it for, those are things that impact how much you pay for insurance. So it's really, we are trying to work within external forces we can't control, and those are the levers that allow us to some extent help people manage auto insurance companies.
Thanks.
I think if I get out just one
Yeah.
thing too, like the top technology that's being built into cars today, it's all predicated on this ultimate move to automated connected vehicles, which is great because then theoretically vehicles won't crash into one another. But in the interim, we're in this space where there's more advanced technology on cars today than there's ever been. But to your point, a bumper that was maybe $500 to replace, now it's got 6 different sensors and everything has to be recalibrated, so it becomes a $2,000 job or something like that. So, that's kind of the flux that we're in as we try and move to a safer model for the occupants by building more technology into the vehicle.
I would say just on that, the day will come when that technology will do more to reduce the likelihood of a crash than it does to increase the average cost of a crash. But we haven't hit that day yet. We do give discounts for things like the autonomous emergency braking, because we do know that reduces crashes, but we haven't hit that turning point where the technology saves more than it costs.
So we've got Slido questions coming up here, and I've got a couple more, but I think let's look at the Slido here. And the top one right now is, we are living through a very, very challenging times economically and geopolitically. How is ICBC keeping insurance rates affordable given all the uncertainty? Oh, you're in hot seat again.
Well, I think I managed some of that actually on the affordability perspective of auto insurance. ICBC, compared to other jurisdictions, is doing really well. And it is, you can't have a lawsuit-based model for your injury claims and have affordable insurance. Nobody in the country has figured out how to do that. And ICBC's model isn't unique. When Alberta shifts to a care-based model, they'll be doing it privately. You'll be able to drive to the Maritimes, and Ontario is the only provincial pass on the way that has the old lawsuit-based model. And the rest is really, what can we do to have good relationships to get the cars fixed? And there's some opportunities for ICBC with technology, make faster decisions, write the vehicle off, or repair it, those kinds of things. But the fact that vehicles are more and more expensive to fix is something you can only manage around. You can't completely control.
Okay, we'll take the next one here. What is being done to protect small auto shops as manufacturers restrict access to tools, data, and warranty-compliant repairs?
I can start on that.
Okay.
So we have an existing agreement in place called CASES, and it provides the same repair information to dealers as it does to the independent shops. I think the good question here is for the federal government, what will happen as Chinese manufacturers come in that don't necessarily have any sort of dealership network or footprint, will they be required to join some of these agreements that the industry has set up over the years? Cases is one of them, but we also have other arrangements to handle for example, to handle vehicle defects. So there's a range of these organizations that have been established by the industry for major investments here in Canada, and they're working, they're effective organizations, and I'd like to know how we're going to incorporate new entrants into the market if they come to Canada.
I would just add, I think, that this is typically flagged as a right to repair issue, and I guess from our perspective, we would say it's a so-called right to repair issue, because from what Brian said as well, that access already exists. I think the challenge for some of the smaller shops, and admittedly, it's not free access. There's a cost to it, just like there is a cost for dealers to access the manufacturing systems and whatnot. So it is predicated on making sure the same information, the same tooling, all that sort of thing is available to the aftermarket as it is to the dealers.
I'd like to just add to this in terms of, because I agree with the case's comment, like, in my opinion, from a dealer perspective, the main impediment to have access to repair services in the next 18, 24 months will be access to technicians, right? It won't be necessarily the right to repair discussion. It will be, does either the auto shop, the small one, the auto dealers have access to the right people and the qualified people to repair those cars? So I think that's the real issue that we need to fix. We have a hotline at CDA for consumers that have problems fixing their car. It's almost a dead line in terms of there's not a whole lot of involvement in that line, but that still remains the case that we need to be present as dealers for those services, and it's not a manufacturer responsibility in terms of what information and giving access. The real issue is, do we have the right people to fix them? And I'll finish by saying with it, we got, in my opinion, an interesting use case in Quebec a few weeks, obviously my own province, where it's the most open in terms of right to repair with Bill 29. And there was a situation that came up in the news where many truck dealers found out that some of their staff, at the request of trucking companies, would remove the anti-pollution technology within the trucking, within the truck, right, at the behest of the truck dealers. So it brings back this discussion of what's the line that we're walking as those cars are getting more and more complicated with more technologies. I understand the access to service, but for me, there's a question where, what's the real problem? I think it's fixing and finding the right technicians. And in terms of technology, I think there's a line that government needs to understand that there's risk involved in being too much on one side of the equation.
Any comments from you?
No, I think they've covered it well. More questions.
So we've got the top question here, and full disclosure, I'm not sure I understand that question, but maybe this is a good opportunity for this panel to shed some light on. With level 4 autonomy coming faster than we know, Waymo, Rivian, how do we ensure BC does not fall behind provinces like Ontario and Alberta who do permit L4 testing? Ken, who wants to explain what that means?
Look, that's really up to the BC government. So we've worked with Ontario on their framework for testing. So this is permitting and allowing specialized testing of autonomous vehicle technology. But it really does come up to it's up to the provincial government to decide if they want to create that framework and attract some of that activity in the province. Ontario's been successful in doing that, and the technology is advancing extremely rapidly. So I can't really say how. I think look at Ontario, and it's really up to the government to want to work with industry to create that framework to do some of that testing.
And I could say, ICBC is the registrar, but we don't set the regulations. That's done by the Ministry of Transportation. And so at level 4 autonomy, fully autonomous vehicles, but with the person in the vehicle. And so, yeah, there would be, we are not in a position where we're able to have those vehicles on the roads in the province at this time. And so, I'm not sure when is the right time to do that, but I understand the question.
I don't know if you caught the news, but somebody was pulled over. I think they were having a snooze while they were in their Tesla, and they had to be reminded that it's not fully autonomous just yet. Yes. Maybe we can because I'm from BCIT and we are a skills trainer, I want to drill down a little bit on the skills training and workforce capacity. I know we've had some conversation around that, but it clearly is something that we need to build capacity to support this type of automotive sector into the future. And so looking at what specific competencies should skills trainers like BCIT be prioritizing now, so graduates are ready for vehicles, technology, and the markets of tomorrow. So, we don't just need technician grads, we need supply chain management, cybersecurity, sales. What are some of those things that we're having a conversation around, and how do we start to build that capacity and look at what are the skills needed? Who would like to start?
Very good start. I think, well, first kudos to BCIT, because I know you folks have been instrumental in developing EV training modules that are now, I think, being licensed across Canada in different colleges. So I think that's pivotal. Each OEM obviously does their own training with their own dealer body as far as EVs are concerned. But to one of the earlier questions, that information needs to get out to the aftermarket as well. So I think having this training done is fundamental. But technology is changing all the time, just on internal combustion engine vehicles. And to Charles' point, there's a real shortage. So trying to figure out a way that we can keep moving the education along as fast as the technology is changing. That's the real problem, because curriculum development just takes so much longer than the technology changes. So some of these ideas of micro-credentials, for instance, that can be developed a lot faster are kind of pivotal. So that would be one thing for sure. And just while we're talking about students, I just wanted to know, I think over here somewhere, there's that table of students from the Canadian Automotive Business School, or the Automotive Business School of Canada. So thanks guys for coming out, and that's your future.
Yeah.
There as well.
It's an international problem that there are more cars to be fixed than people that want to learn how to fix cars. I think we are working with the Automotive Retailer Association how to promote more apprenticeship. I think some of the opportunities are with the technology and attracting different students. I heard a mechanical engineer for electric vehicles say the reason you now wear gloves so you don't get the car dirty. And that's a big shift, and so it's also maybe a big shift in who may be interested in going into that field, and I think some of those are opportunities to explore.
I mean, we're continuing to see a gray tsunami rolling through our sector, as it is through many sectors. I think the average age of a service technician labor market study from a number of years ago was 56 years old. That's 56 years old average age. So we have a real problem in needing people who know how to deal with all of this technology that's changing every minute of the day. So great that BCIT is doing all the work they're doing. Vancouver Community College is here. They're building a new center for innovation and trades training over at the campus near Broadway. Automotive Business School of Canada has got some great folks coming along. But the average influencer, I think, of most people, most young folks thinking of a career choice, have an older view of what the industry was like. The grease monkey, it's not like that. They're walking around with laptops. I mean, it's a very high-tech, exciting business with great career opportunities. So when you come down to the Vancouver International Auto Show this week, both BCIT and Vancouver Community College will be there with some fun exhibits and things, and I encourage you to go and talk to them so that when you're talking to young folks, and maybe not so young folks in their lives, that automotive is a really exciting opportunity for them on the technology, the repair side, sales, service, lots of opportunity.
And also, I think it's there's also like a pressing need. So I think there's a combination of the great work that's being done and empowering everybody involved, including like Blair said, the Auto Business School, and making sure that our initiatives are not only strong but keep growing, but also there has to be, at least at the federal level, I know it's a complicated topic, but there needs to be a recognition of how dire the problem is, right? And then now the whole discussion on temporary foreign workers, which is a huge resource, especially for rural dealers across the nation, in terms of being able to get them. I think the federal government would benefit from having an approach that's specific on auto and could lump it in with the entire discussion that's happening on the auto strategy. I think it had a window of opportunity for the labor's discussion. I don't know if it's the right word in English, I apologize if it isn't, but just to put it in there and make sure that we have a specific program that not only, once again, empowers what we have at home that we're building, but in terms of volume, we're not getting there. And we need to move away from partisan discussions and make sure that the resources we have to allow our dealers to go get the workers they need in other places while getting some at home. These streams need to be maintained and conserved and be free of partisan discussion.
Yeah, because how do we stack up against the U.S. and Mexico? Does anybody on the panel know, as for trades training and how we support this in the EV sector, the automotive sector? What are other countries doing, and how is Canada positioned compared to others? Do you know?
I didn't realize you were question.
So with the trades, right, we have to put more focus on trades to
Yes.
support and repair, but do we have a sense of how Canada stacks up against the U.S. and Mexico as far as that skilled labor force?
Yeah, I think what Jason said, like it's an international problem, and that a lot of countries are competing for some of that talent, right? And the same natural problems are there in terms of we're not getting enough people in the streams that we need, and we need to change the stigma around the profession. I also think that it's something that's always been part of the. I know our Boston Mars at TV looked at some board meetings notes from the 1960s, and tech shortage was one part of it, right? So that doesn't mean that we can't fix it. I think it needs to be a specific approach because every country is dealing with the same thing. So once you know that the basis is everybody's competing for talent and it's a challenge, what can Canada do to rise above the crop and make itself as an enticing place, and also as a place that finances and supports local initiatives to the workers in our shops and in factories.
I think the last thing we want to do though is have people come in and train people and then have them go back to their home country. So this is a challenge as well, but it was part of the trade mission earlier this year down to Mexico, and that was one of the things that we sort of figured, okay, well, there is a community of interest there because the average age in Mexico is about 15 years younger than the average age here. And so there is a real opportunity kind of within that USMCA, North American region, if you want to call it that, to do just that, bring workers up here, train them. Hopefully they want to stay, bring their families, and maybe not having to go all over the world, which I know some of the CABA folks are going to find technicians.
And it's less BC versus other jurisdictions, as there's a huge urban versus rural issue when it comes to vehicle repair. I was in Prince Rupert recently. They don't have a single collision repair facility in Prince Rupert anymore. And so it is an even magnified problem getting folks, one, to learn be skilled tradespeople in the industry, and two, choose to move to more rural, remote locations.
Yeah.
And it's pretty hard on the economy if we can't get things fixed. Things will wind down pretty quickly. So it's something that governments and the industry need to really be laser focused on with the support of the institutions doing the education training.
Absolutely. So we're down to our last few minutes. So I'm going to ask each of you in one sentence, if you were having this conversation again in 2 years, what is the one thing you would most hope for as improved in Canada's automotive ecosystem? So one quick sentence. Blair?
In 2 years from now, there's an election in the States around that time. I don't think that make any difference at all. I think hopefully we have some consistency across jurisdictions on policy, that we're dealing with the affordability concerns that folks are dealing across the country around purchasing a new vehicle that they need for their lives. So I think some consistency in policy and dealing with affordability challenges. Hopefully technology is helping with some of that, bringing prices down on things. But,
And I'm very timely that we've been talking the last few minutes, but that if we had a pipeline or the appropriate number of qualified technicians to serve the needs across the province, I think is an attainable, achievable objective in that kind of time.
I'd say within 2 years, the my understanding of our integrated automotive market is maintain, or at least the general gist of it is pretty much there. I would see it as a success, and within that, being logical as a government on controlling when you can control it, Grant said, and from a retail perspective, start removing those impediments that make no sense, like street tax, some little legislation that are there for, in my opinion, ideology purposes and not bring anything into the competitiveness and increase profitability.
Many other things to say here, but I think, echoing some of the others, I mean, I think, you know, for Canada's auto industry, it's pivotal that we have unimpaired access to the U.S. market. And I think everybody's probably aware that there's a review of the USMCA coming up in July. My own personal view is that we're not going to get an agreement, so the way that process works is that, you know, we sort of negotiate for another year and then see where things wrap, which is unfortunate because it just breeds more continued uncertainty. And I think for Canada generally, for the automotive industry, for Canada generally, we do need to get our relationship sorted out with the U.S. and get some degree of certainty, whatever that ends up being, and be able to move forward. Because right now it's a real impediment on investment and whatnot as well, for sure.
I would like to see common sense EV policies that focus on supporting consumers that want to switch to electric as opposed to mandating that people move to electric. And if I can leave you with one more number, in BC right now there's 7,600 public charging stations. According to the government's own estimates, they need 26,000 public chargers by 2030 to support their own targets. That is not going to work, clearly, and there is no path, no investment announced, there is no way that they're going to build that much infrastructure. So let's move away from mandating. We all want to electrify, but we've got to help people in this switch, and the best way to do it is to build out all those supports, create the preconditions, and you will see more adoption. So I hope in 2 years we'll do that.
Thank you. So I want to take a quick minute to thank our panelists for joining us today. The Greater Vancouver Board of Trade for this important topic, and not my BCIT colleagues over here and my post-secondary colleagues in the room, and our students who are that generation that we need to help us move this sector forward. And I know Blair needs a little, maybe a few seconds just to continue to plug the auto show and
Yeah, no, all of you will receive a digital ticket. We're going to work with the Board of Trade to get those out. So come and see the auto show. Over 300 vehicles from 30 different manufacturers and dealer groups. About 300,000 square feet of all sorts of fun and beautiful vehicles. It'll be a great opportunity if you've been thinking about a car. We're going to do an EV test drive, so we'll have 50 different models. If you've been thinking maybe this EV thing's something I should explore, come and try some out. We'll be happy to do that. It's a great place under one roof to compare all sorts of different vehicles at the beautiful Vancouver Convention Center. Thanks, Mr. Gretny, our venue host. Look forward to it. Thanks again, Bridget, for bringing this on. I think the average person, if you ask them on the street in Toronto what the big industries are in Canada, automotive would probably come up. But I don't know if you would ask people on House Street here the same question, whether automotive would come up. It's a huge sector, an incredibly important one. I'm glad you're all here to join us today.
Thank you.